everyone. I'm Naveen Agarwal and welcome to this recording of our latest interactive Q&A session. We had another great conversation. Those of you who are not familiar, we do this every month and it's a great way to engage with industry colleagues in the medical device area in a very casual, informal conversation. We talked about the latest update on ISO 14971 2019 harmonization in Europe. Good news, is a done deal and we should hear an official announcement early December. But mostly we talked about cybersecurity for medical devices and how to link it to ISO 14971 risk management system. There's a lot of uncertainty about cybersecurity. It's an emerging area, but a lot of concern and uncertainty. The regulatory landscape is still evolving and we are still learning how to do it right. So we had a good discussion, but it's only an opening discussion. We'll have more conversations in the future and I look forward to seeing you there. Now, if you are a member of our free knowledge sharing forum, you'll get a link to this video where you can watch what we talked about. But if not, there's a link below as part of this introductory video where you can join. It's free to join and you get access to not only this video but also other resources. But most importantly, you are able to then have a conversation with other members. You can post a comment, post a question, respond to questions and comments and share your expertise. So we have a lot of discussion going on and I invite you to join us. I hope you will consider joining us in our next Q&A session. I usually share that information on my LinkedIn page and also all the members get to know that in advance anyway. I look forward to hearing from you. If you have questions, comments, thoughts, please share that with me anytime. Reach out. Thank you so much again for your attention. Let me know what's on your mind and I look forward to seeing you. First of all, good morning everyone and welcome to our monthly interactive Q&A. This is just supposed to be a very casual forum, right? So we don't do a lot of, big technical discussion. We go through technical topics, but more from the point of view of conversation and dialogue and have more engagement and interaction. That's the intent. And you might have seen other videos in the past. It's really meant to be very, very casual. Today, we are going to be focused on cybersecurity and linking to ISO 14971 because this was requested by someone. I hope they joined. But I think the topic generated a lot of interest as well. It's an emerging topic and we also we know that ISO 14971 has been revised. So how is it going to play out? What is happening in the industry? What are the key challenges and questions and what best practices we can share with each other? That would be the intent of this conversation. I know, Ed, you said you had an important announcement to make, so I would let you go first. And after that, I have only a couple of slides to set the stage and give some background. But I want this to be very casual and more Q&A type of engagement and discussion. So Ed, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Naveen. I appreciate the opportunity to inform everyone that EN ISO 14971 2019 has been amended. Amendment 11 is in the process of being published and it should be available on December 8th, according to CEN, okay, the European Norms Committee. The standard will be published by your European standards provider. CEN doesn't publish standards, they coordinate the process. Now, what does this mean? Okay, so we got this amendment. The amendment has two important things, Annex ZA and Annex ZB. And those are the annexes that address ZA, the MDR, and ZB, the IVDR. This will be the standard that when the official journal comes out, it will be listed as the harmonized version of EN ISO 14971. So the plan is by the standards people to get it out December 8th. We don't know when the official journal is going to list its next list of harmonized standards, but If they do it closer to the end of December, it should be on that list, along with ISO 13485, which was the amended version was published in September. So 13485 has an Annex ZA and ZB. And if you buy the British standards version, BSI, it also has an Annex NZ, which is the national standards deviation. So for Brexit, the Annex NZ applies. But that was I guess, from what I understand, kind of a test case to see how the UK was going to handle standards. So anyway.
That's great. That's great news. Finally, it's here.
Now, I will explain it on a video I'm doing for AAMI that will be presented on December 15th, because I've had access to this for over a month because of my connections to the Standards Committee. So I've been preparing, and we've got a 3-hour presentation lined up to cover what will be will be in this version of the standard. And that information is available for registration at aami.org, amy.org, and I'll put that in the chat.
Sure. When is that going to come out, Ed? Any timing on that?
What's that, the standard?
No, the video. The video presentation.
Well, it'll be live on the 15th of December.
Perfect. So we'll all mark our calendars and we're going to listen to you.
Yeah.
Ed, also remind us again where we can purchase this amended version from. You mentioned BSI. Are there other sources?
Any of the European standards providers. So DIN, the cheapest one I understand is available from Estonia. They have cheaper standards than anybody else, from what I've been informed. So there's any of your standards providers, and if you do need the UK version for the Brexit stuff, I would recommend you get the British standards version.
Great. Now we have a lot of colleagues joining us from Europe today, Netherlands, Basel, Switzerland. So I would open the floor to them as well. If you guys want to share any information, any insight based on what you have come across, anything that we can learn from. So, make sure you unmute your mic and just share anything that's important for the group to know.
Yeah, I just have a question. I mean, for Ed only, I don't know whether he knows, is there any chance this amended or 14971 will be harmonized with MDR?
That will be the harmonized version.
That will be, okay.
Yeah, the standard will be released on December 8th. It has to be published in the official journal.
Yeah.
So we got it. Well, it will be.
Okay.
It's already been approved by the EC. The EC approved the Annex ZA and ZB. So the process, of course, is that it has to be published in the official journal. They're doing harmonized standards list twice a year now, one in June and one in December, supposedly. So hopefully
then
in December, we will see the next list of harmonized standards, and 14971 will be on it.
Thanks. Yeah,
Perfect.
I hope.
Yeah, we have been waiting for it for some time now. So
yes,
it's
some
good
time,
to see,
and yeah,
see it
and
coming
especially
out.
with our MDR audits and other things now, it's a bit tricky when you you list this 19, but then it's not still on the list, but you still cannot use from 2012 or something. So it's just a bit tricky these days.
The 2019 has been accepted by some notified bodies as the state-of-the-art standard, and you can use it.
Yeah.
One thing I will caution you about is, what is it? The MDR uses the word risk 243 times. The 243 are not all covered in the Z annexes. So
Yeah.
you're going to have to do some gap analyses, and that's what I'm going to go through.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we look forward
Yeah.
to that Amy presentation, Ed. Thank you for sharing that information.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, Ed.
it'll be good to mark our calendars for that. Anybody else has any other thoughts, comments, questions to share on this particular update?
Naveen, I will mention you need to register in advance for that.
Okay.
So go
And
to
is there Ed, is it free or is there a fee for that?
There's a fee for that.
Okay. All right. So yes, please go ahead and look at the registration page and see if you want to attend or not. Okay, with that, what I want to do is go over some of the very, very introductory slides that I have put together just to introduce this topic. And again, in our forum, we are talking about for the first time, and it is a big topic. So by no means we are going to be able to cover everything about this, but the intent here is to get going, get started, and have a discussion and maybe continue in our future Q&A sessions a little bit more deeper dive into this. So I will share my screen with everybody. Let me know if you guys can see this. Let me put this into.
There we are. Okay.
Let me put this into the presentation mode. Can you?
It went away when you clicked it there.
I know this is a little bit. Okay, now. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I want to start with something interesting. For a while, at least in my household, we were hooked on this show called Homeland on Showtime. Anybody heard about that show? It's a big like CIA type of a very exciting show. Homeland.
No.
So it was very popular. And in episode 10, season 2, see, so way back in 2012, I gave you the date also. They actually show a scenario in which someone is trying to hack into the vice president's pacemaker to inflict some real harm. Of course, you know, it's a spy movie. So obviously very exciting. So, okay, fine. It's kind of part of fiction, part of drama and exciting to watch. But then I came across this. There was a TV interview with Vice President Cheney at that time, in which he shared, now this was 2013, he was not VP at that time. So way back when, he shared that he had some of the features which use this communication, wireless communication, turned off because they took the threat seriously. So the point of this information is that I think we are all aware now. This was like about 10 years ago. It's not the question of if, but when, right? We all realize that. We hear about cyber attacks in other industries all the time, healthcare industry a lot, but mostly for information, not yet for causing some damage or injury to people. But it's a question of not if, but when. I think that's the key point that I take away. And it was part of fiction long time ago, but now we realize it's really here. So like everything, the first thing I do is that I go to the dictionary. I want to understand what it means, how it is defined. And it's in Merriam-Webster dictionary. Again, first known use is 1989, so it's not that long ago. Measures taken to protect a computer or computer systems as on the internet against unauthorized access or attacks. So of course, we understand that now. But that's the definition. It's fairly new. And why it becomes relevant for medical devices. Now, this report is a little bit dated. It came out in 2018 from Deloitte, and in which they are talking about Internet of Medical Things, IOMT, connected medical device, pretty big number. 15 billion by 2017. I don't know if they realize that or not. But by 2022, which is next year, over 50 billion. That would be about a tenth, maybe a little bit more than 10th of the medical device industry. So it's pretty significant growth, but look at this number. 67% of the device makers who believe an attack on one or more of their devices is likely, 67%. Only 17% are taking steps to prevent attacks. So big gap between vulnerability and if it exploited, what happens to the patients and people. People are in business, people are worried about that. So this is a big concern. And I'm sure you are hearing about that within your circle of friends or in your area. Now, I monitored FDA has issued multiple safety alerts. So you can go to FDA's website. In fact, recently they came out with a video educating people about cybersecurity. So they are taking it quite seriously. And of course, on the left, I show you, they say these are alerts. They have not resulted into injury yet. But if left unpatched or mitigated, these vulnerabilities could allow unauthorized access, control, issue commands to compromise devices, potentially leading to potential harm. So it is recognized and they are monitoring it. We have a system in place. The problem is that the regulatory landscape is still evolving. We don't know exactly how it'll be regulated, what the requirements would be. It's still shaping up. So they have a pre-market guidance. Note, it's in draft form. And the last draft was in 2018. We are sitting in end of 2021. It is not finalized yet. And I attended a conference early last year where a representative from FDA came and spoke, and they recognized some very key specific challenges, which is holding them back from finalizing it. So they're going back and forth with the industry and trying to understand the impact about whatever guidance or requirements they want to put it through. But they do have a post-market guide. So there are expectations on the post-market side to follow up. And again, I would love to hear from our colleagues in Europe what is happening there. I don't have as much exposure or understanding of the environment, the regulatory environment in Europe related to cybersecurity. So I would love to have that as part of our discussion today. There are two guidance documents from AMI, TIR 57 and TIR 97, pre-market and post-market. Again, this was a few years ago, 2019. So we are still 3 years after that. I expect some changes to happen. And one of the changes that has happened is ISO 14971 has been revised. So that's an interesting question I want to pose to the group in terms of what your thoughts are in a slide later on. So here's a key concept which I think is very important for us to understand. It's in the TIR 57. That you have security risks and you have safety risks, and you have this intersection in the middle. So safety risk, security risk with safety impact is what they considered at that time to be within the scope of ISO 14971. And again, Ed, I would love to hear from you. What is your current view right now in terms of, okay, presentation, blink. So here is the table. Here is a chart that they show in the TIR 57, and some of you may already be familiar with it, but I wanted to show this to everybody in the group, is that in that guidance, they recommended a parallel path approach. Security risk management plan decoupled from safety risk management plan, but there's a link. Wherever you have security risk with potential safety impact, they need to be evaluated within the framework of ISO 14971. And whatever risk controls you implement, go back to security analysis, see if there's an impact, and vice versa. If there's a security risk control, see if there's an impact from the safety point of view. So my question to the group is, again, I will open this up in just a few minutes. Does this still make sense in the context of ISO 14971 2019, where the term harm is no longer limited to physical injury? In fact, they spend quite an amount of space in that guidance justifying why a two-track parallel approach is recommended. And they really talk about not everything, not every risk is relating to safety or patient injury. That's why you should keep them separate. So this will be a question for discussion. I just want to very briefly touch upon a theoretical framework or a very simple framework that we should keep in mind while looking at this. Is at the end of the day, we have to look at hazards and find hazards which are relevant if a vulnerability is successfully exploited. And then I would invite your discussion and comments about how you do that and what have you heard that has helped you evaluate hazards, because it starts from there. I show this in my training classes that there's a trigger event, leads to a sequence of events, and TR 24971 describes it really well. Hazardous situation where one or more hazards are, in my mind, activated and the patient or user is exposed. And that's how the harm happens. So we had to kind of walk this sequence when we are looking at vulnerabilities, exploitability, the risk. And it would be interesting to talk about how it is done when we talk about cybersecurity. So again, one very area of good discussion that I'm looking forward to. Last slide is very good table in TIR 57. Again, some of you may already be familiar. It maps the terminology. And this is, I really focus on terminology because it could mean different things to different people. And sure enough, in different reports and standards, things are defined differently, but they give you a map. Hazardous situation in particular, in my experience, has been difficult for people to articulate and define in their risk analysis process. And here they define hazardous situation. See, they still talk about 2007. So I'm sure this guidance will be revised soon. But they link it to a threat event in the context of TIR 57. So there is mapping, and I think we can leverage that mapping to understand how to link these concepts from security to safety. So I'm going to stop here and really open the floor for discussion, because I'm hoping that this background should allow us to engage in good dialogue. And again, as I mentioned before, our intent here is not to dig too deep, but really learn from each other. What are we thinking? Challenges, questions, best practices, ideas. So I will stop and open the floor to anybody who would like to just talk about some of the things we discussed in these slides.
Naveen, I've got to go in 2 minutes. So
okay, go ahead. So please share your thoughts.
First of all, the two processes map that you showed between cybersecurity and risk management, it was dated 2007. That largely hasn't changed. That's basically the same process. So that one you can just cross out the 2007 on and use that. Also, you made an important statement. Not all risks end up causing safety issues. All of your risks that cause safety issues need to be in your 14971 single risk analysis. You don't want to have multiple risk analyses all over the place, like one for cybersecurity and one for biocompatibility and one for electrical and all this. They have to be brought together in a single risk analysis document. And it can be done using a traceability matrix that I've talked about in the past. So make sure that when you do create an analysis of cybersecurity risks, that information is moved into the 14971 risk analysis when it's a safety issue.
Okay? Got it. Thank you, Ed. Thanks for clarifying that.
Okay. And I have to go because I got another call I just have to be on.
Great. Thank you, Ed. I appreciate it. Thank you. See you soon. Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Same to you, and everybody have a great day.
Okay. Yes. So the floor is open, guys. And again, we are, like I mentioned, very casual. Please don't hold back. And anytime if you want to, just share something, unmute if you are muted and just speak up or raise your hand and I will call on you. Anybody, are you beginning to work in this area, or you have, just basic interest, some basic questions, anything on your mind? You guys can just share that. Any thoughts? What are you guys thinking about?
I have a question.
Yes, Tim, please go ahead.
So the 2018 FTA guidance, which is draft, I'm a little unsure how they deal with that because it's not released yet. So there is a 2014 that's quite short, but do you know when that's going to come out? And is it good practice to design to the draft guidance, or what are your thoughts?
Yes, so good question. So I think COVID has caused a lot of problem in terms of timelines. I remember in early 2020 when I attended this conference where the discussion was, sometime late 2020, early 2021, this draft could be finalized. So the draft is still there. Actually, you can go to FDA's website and look at the draft. One of the main points of discussion, I believe, is, and again, I would love to hear from other folks who are more familiar with this, is software bill of materials, SBOM. So there was some language around that. There was some language around severity or risk level that was confusing with how the risk levels are assigned to the medical device, class 1, class 2, class 3. There was some confusion. And but the SBOM was the major point of discussion with the industry, because that would have been a pretty overwhelming burden on the industry. So they were still trying to figure out how to regulate, what to require in pre-market submissions. So the latest I've heard, again, it might change. Things are still fluid, maybe sometime next year. But as you know, FDA is also supposed to work on harmonizing against ISO 13485, correct? We know that timeline has slipped. So it's not clear exactly when we can see it, hopefully soon. And I would say that the draft is a good starting point, but I don't think they will land there, at least as far as SBOM is concerned.
And how does it phase in for their expectations? So if you submit a 510K 2 weeks after it comes out, do they expect you to follow that guidance? Or?
Well, I don't have too much experience on the regulatory interface, but my understanding is this, from a common sense point of view, is that use the pre-sub process. You can engage with them, have a conversation even before you submit your 510K. So you can go through those steps and iterations, have a communication with them, and it is evolving. Nobody says that expectations are completely clear. So it might be case by case. So I would strongly encourage you to work with your regulatory affairs colleagues and develop a strategy, a plan to engage with the FDA, and not wait until you are going there with the submission package. That would be my suggestion.
Thank you.
But good question. Thank you for asking that. And again, floor is open, really. We like to have back and forth and open discussion. So anybody who has any ideas, thoughts, comments, what you have done or what you are working on, without, of course, going through proprietary details, but feel free to kind of either raise your hand or speak up. Anybody else? How are you guys overall feeling about this in terms of having to, manage this, integrate with ISO 14971, or, if you have a new product coming up or you have legacy products? What are some of the top of mind questions and thoughts for you?
Oh, so quiet.
You may be on mute if you are trying to speak up, but go ahead and unmute yourself. Anybody? What is okay?
Hi, Naveen. This is Brian.
Hi, Brian. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you for organizing this event, and especially having this team about cybersecurity. I think this is a good topic and raise several questions. And especially in Europe, where we don't have any guidance document on how to perform risk assessment based on cybersecurity. So for the US, you have the DR 57, and in Europe, we don't have anything. So that's why I reached out towards you, and just to ask, how do you assess cybersecurity risk and integrate it within your risk management file? As Ed said, you need to combine it and integrate it into one file. But and that is the question that I'm struggling with. How do you assess those risks, and how do you implement in one risk register? And perhaps other participants have an idea or already are doing this. So please, if someone else is already doing it, enlighten me.
Yes, so go ahead. Anybody has any thoughts suggestions on this particular question?
So, I mean, just to address it from a European point of view, I mean, I'm very, very new to cybersecurity, but risk management, I'm not new to at all. But the 24971, which is the guidance for 14971, has a whole annex on cybersecurity.
Correct.
So there is
Yeah.
guidance out there. It's maybe not as explicit and detailed as other national guidance documents, but it is there. And just for those who may not be aware, there is also a 34971 in the works, which is specific to artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Oh,
So
I
it's the
did not know
application
that.
of 14971 for those specific areas. It doesn't cover cybersecurity in huge detail. It barely even mentions it, to be honest, but it does talk a little bit about threats and prompts you to think about it from that perspective and build that into your risk management process. But in answer to the question, I think exactly as Ed said a few minutes ago, it's a hazard. It's a type of hazard. It's just you combine it with everything else in the same way you put electrical hazards in with biocompatibility hazards, with chemical hazards, with functional hazards, etc. To me, it's the same contrast of different subjects, but you find a way of putting them in together. I don't know how other people approach it, but quite often I've seen risk files structured heavily on the hazard, which then means that all the discussion around hazardous situations and sequence events jumps around because it's focused on the hazard.
Yes.
And that makes sensible reading when you're trying to go through a list of hazards and you're using the list of hazards from the guidance and stuff like that. But when you're actually trying to develop it from scratch, and as a reviewer, when you're trying to review it and make sure it makes sense, I've started to find more and more recently that it actually makes more sense if you put the hazard aside. Don't forget it. That obviously has to be part of your documentation. But in terms of how you lay it out, I feel it's more logical to lay it out in the steps of the use and the life cycle of the product. So that as someone's thinking through it, they're thinking, okay, well, you unpack it and you do this, and then you do this, and you do this. And then at each step, you talk about the hazard and identify whether at that initial stage, whether it's an electrical hazard, whether it's a functional hazard. And
thank you for sharing that.
Doing that might get people away from the problem of where do I put my cybersecurity stuff? Where do I put this? Where do I put that?
Yep.
If you just
Thank
put
you
it
for
in the
sharing
sequence of use, then maybe.
Yes, great. Thanks for sharing that. So
And
go ahead.
yeah, just a follow-up question, Ed. So in terms of criteria for impact, so severity and occurrence, what do you define as these criteria? Do you have an idea how to define this?
Ed, you might be on mute if you are trying to answer that.
Sorry. Double mute. That's always
no problem.
It's the same with every single thing. If you know it's part of the risk policy piece of it. It's part of establishing that criteria. You need to know the context of your products, how your products are used, what the consequences of your products would be, and what the user's and the customer's tolerance for risk would be, and what they're expecting. And then you can start to structure your criteria around. So if you know that your product has data and contains data or processes data, or it potentially is going to have cybersecurity related issues in terms of the risk, then your criteria should build that in. So it shouldn't focus just on physical harm. And like Naveen said, the definition of harm was expanded, so it brings in things like psychological harm as well. And so you would also include in your criteria, if you say, for example, you had a 5-scale criteria, 1 to 5 in your serious thing, then you, as well as serious injury that could lead to death, you would also need to think, okay, what's the worst kind of data theft, or what's the worst kind of loss of this or loss of that, or is it just simply dissatisfaction, or is it something that could be more
Right.
serious in terms of loss of trust or loss of personal data and all those kind of things, psychological harm that goes with it, etc.?
Yeah, go ahead, Shalu. I think you were
Yeah.
trying to share something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just about to say maybe as a guidance, because in Europe we have this MDCG Guidance on Cybersecurity for Medical Device 2019-16 number. I can share in the chat that part.
Please do.
Yeah, because it's really nice. We were trying to do, because we are in a pre-development phase with some smart devices. So it really is a good guidance which tells you, and based on this guidance, we really started doing it, like categorize your cybersecurity or whatever risks you have. And it's good guidance which tells you that you really say first kind of IT security, one section, and second, it is helpful at times depending on your device. Second section, information security, and third, operational security, which Ed was also there, that what can happen with the safety risks or the security risks during operation. Your IT fine information is secure, but during operational part, when its device is operating, which kind of security risks you can have. But that's a good guidance if outside Europe people don't know this. This is a guidance document on cybersecurity.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I will share the name. If I can share the document, I will try, but I can share the link.
Sure, maybe we can look up.
Yep.
So I think one comment I wanted to make, Brian, to your question and the discussion from you, Ed, is you were right that in terms of, we really don't need to change the way we do risk analysis, but be aware of uncertainty in our estimates. So as you know, benefit risk, at the end of the day, it's all about benefit risk, right? And benefit risk is not a single number. There's always uncertainty associated with that. So if you have identified cybersecurity related risks that are also impacting safety, you could do the same kind of risk analysis and estimate in terms of severity and likelihood, but probably your level of uncertainty might be higher. Okay, and you should recognize that. What is your level of uncertainty? Maybe you develop a scale for level of uncertainty, an internal scale probably. And what I like to advise people is that leverage the post-market surveillance plan to gather more information, which will help you reduce the level of uncertainty over time. Don't look at that as a regulatory compliance-ish problem that I now have to have a PMS plan. But imagine if you could put together a very special focus plan to go after certain risks where you don't have a lot of certainty. You could gather more information proactively and then bring this uncertain. So I think we should realize that we cannot be perfect right out of the gate. That should not be the goal. The goal should be having a process in place that allows you to respond and continually lower the level of uncertainty. So you don't probably need to reinvent a new scale. If you already have a scale, apply the scale, but assign an uncertainty factor. Brian, I don't know if that helps you to think a little bit differently about this.
Yeah, it does. And as you are speaking and based on the talk with that, I'm trying to think what can I adjust, because if you look at the criteria from the 4971, it defines already criteria. For example, for probability, there's a formula for the likelihood also, but for the severity, there's also a criteria defined. But and I'm just thinking, what can I change in terms of those criteria to also incorporate cybersecurity risk? So so if there's a criteria might cause harm to the patient, then perhaps I should add a factor or additional risk might cause data loss or something. So it's still within the probability and severity, and without having the need to add a factor in addition to the likelihood and severity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I had in mind is before this talk is likelihood against severity, against cybersecurity or vulnerability. But now I think perhaps I can change the criteria. It's already defined and perhaps extend it more Yeah, that is something that I'm thinking about right now.
Yeah, what I would say is that you should not try to make the analysis as an evaluation process more complex, but rather try to recognize the uncertainty in your analysis. So you already have a framework. In fact, there is no requirement for you to have numerical probabilities, right? It may not be possible. You may have qualitative levels defined, and most people do qualitative levels. It's a definition of qualitative levels that should be clear and enough separation between those levels. But within that framework, you can always have an engineering judgment, a medical judgment. You can say, I think it falls at 3, but I'm really not sure at this point of time. But I'm definitely sure it is not 5 or it is not 1. So you can say my level of uncertainty is higher, but I think I'm going to put 3 for now, but have this list of things that I must do to reduce that uncertainty over time. That's your plan. That's your post-market surveillance plan. You could use that tool that's available to you. I would not, unless it's absolutely necessary, I would not advise you to create a new scale or a new factor in your analysis. This will make it more complex. Any other thoughts, suggestions on this? What have you guys tried, or are you thinking about? What challenges are you facing as you try to integrate this in your ISO 14971 risk management process?
Not specific to cybersecurity, Naveen, but some of the noise coming from notified body reviews already in Europe is that auditors are pushing for quantitative scales, despite the fact it doesn't require it in the standard or in the regulations for risk. They see it required, and I know Ed Bills has talked about it in some of his presentations and seminars as well, that they're looking for a numerical benefit risk ratio. Mm-hmm. And so if they can't see a link back to a quantitative scale in the risk, then they start asking more questions. So it's just to be mindful of those questions cropping up at some point.
Yes.
I don't have a solution at this stage. I'm just...
Well, to be honest, and again, in this forum, we have a lot of candid conversation, by the way. I think, and I'm independent, so I can actually speak a little bit more freely. I would say to all of us is that I think part of the challenge we are facing is we have auditors as a stakeholder. We have our patients as a stakeholder. We have our business people as stakeholders. Our customers are, we have so many stakeholders. And at one point or another time, someone has a veto power. And in our industry, typically it has been the auditor. Once they say, oh, you have this non-conformance, all hell breaks loose, right? Kathy, were you trying to say something? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
No. So what I was trying to share with you is, yes, you will get pressure from different stakeholders all the time because they are worried about small piece of their area, right? They're because notified bodies also now have a skin in the game, right? They need to be, they're a little bit more accountable from an MDR perspective. So they are thinking, how can I show from my side as black and white as possible? But risk management is both art and science. There is a little bit of art to it. Long story short, what I'm trying to tell you is there are many ways in which you can satisfy that request of showing quantitative information. Many different ways. You don't have to have 4 numbers after the decimal point to show I have done quantitative analysis, or a Bayesian statistics to do I have done quantitative analysis. You can do whatever is most appropriate to you and still be quantitative enough. That's the challenge. And that's one challenge, to decide where to not go more complex than necessary. And the second challenge is how to communicate it convincingly to somebody who is looking for something more concrete than that. It'll take a while, but I think you probably, what I would advise is not to go right away what you're hearing from the auditor and give them a threshold. This is what I've seen happen. People are being asked to develop a threshold. They develop a threshold. As soon as something exceeds their threshold, now they have to do something, but they don't know what to do anymore because the threshold itself doesn't make sense. So try not to fall into that trap of creating these artificial numbers, which really don't mean much from the safety point of view. And it's easier said than done. I do realize that. But if you keep that in mind and really ask the question, how can I do both? How can I show that I have done quantitative analysis and not tie myself to a threshold or a number that really doesn't make sense for me? It's, like I said, easier said than done, but that should be the approach. Any thoughts, questions on that? Good point though. Yeah, I know auditors are driving a lot of these behaviors, which in my opinion are not very productive for our patients. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not hurting anybody's feelings if you're in the audit field. I do lead auditor training, and that's the first thing I teach people is you are there to help your clients serve the patients better, not to find a non-conformance. That's not your job. But that's how I look at things. But if you are in the audit business, my intent is not to hurt your feelings or criticize you, but to make you aware that this is happening in general in our industry. Any thoughts, comments? What's on your mind? Okay, so if cybersecurity is so new and emerging, I know we have 10 minutes. You might have some specific questions in another area. Would you like to bring them up? Floor is open. It could be general conversation as well, general question.
In that case, if I may.
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
So I'm also in the European market as an intern, but I have a question about the FMIA. So
about FMEA?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
So we have decided to use the FMIA method. Does it, for a particular device, have to be all encompassing, including the PMFMAE and the SFMEA? So how thorough does it have to be?
I think if the way to look at this would be, maybe you are asking the question, is it going to be all in one file or could it be different documents? Let me clarify that first with you.
Not necessarily, just does it have to include the other assets as well?
Yeah, so you have to walk the whole process, how the product is made, what it involves, from design, from manufacturing, service and maintenance, to identify where you might have opportunities for failure that may trigger an event. So that's a big picture, right? Having said that, you also have to exercise some judgment about the level of granularity you want. If you clearly see failure modes in your software piece, typically I've seen the software piece combined with the design, by the way. And manufacturing, if you have hardware, components, the manufacturing piece goes a little bit separate. And if you have installation and maintenance, that goes a little bit separate. And eventually you have to bring all of it together from a hazardous situation and harm point of view. So the biggest challenge people face is not in terms of the FMEAs, Sean, right?
Yes.
People are able to do FMEAs. The challenge they face is how to integrate this all together and deliver risk analysis from a hazardous situation and harm point of view. That gap they are not able to bridge. And this is what I have encountered in all my workshops and my trainings. And specifically, there's one where I really address this question of how you go from failure modes to your hazardous situations and harms. So understanding that relationship is important to manage this complexity. But theoretically speaking, you are required to analyze all potential risks. So it doesn't matter where they are coming from.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So it can be overwhelming, but if you understand the concept behind it, you may probably organize it in a way that makes it a little bit easier. Anybody else wants to share their experience using FMEAs? What has worked for you? What has not?
I put a lot of effort into process FMEAs and then struggled with how to integrate it with the product risk analysis. And
yeah,
typically a process FMEA has got a detectability column, so it doesn't match exactly. So I'm just curious what you think the best practice is.
So what I have kind of tried to help people understand is that you could apply a different method to analyze the risk of failure versus risk of harm. So that's point number one. You could apply a different method. It doesn't have to be the same severity POH method or P1, P2 method. You could evaluate the risk of failure separate from harm. As long as you are addressing the risk of harm within the context of ISO 14971, it does not tell you one way or another how you should address the estimate or evaluate risk in FMEAs. So that just to clarify, you could do a different approach, and that's what I teach people to figure that out. But link the two. There should be a linkage, right? And the second thing that I tell people is that individual failure modes are not always responsible for leading to hazardous situation and harms. Usually it's a collection of events, and some of them may not involve any failure at all. And that makes things a little bit more complex. So it's an integration piece, team, and of course, that's actually a full kind of course and workshop. But fundamentally, if you understand that you don't have to do them same way, you could find a way to separate them, but find a connecting point. It can be done.
Thank you.
So I know I'm not giving you like exactly a recipe or a process, because it's not possible to do that in a general way. General way, the idea is think like an engineer, that I want to minimize and control my failure modes. That's what the engineers do. Doctors, on the other hand, would think about how to prevent a hazardous situation from happening and what kind of hazardous situation can happen. And they are thinking broadly, not just the device. So a little bit, it's a combination of engineering analysis and kind of medical analysis on two ends, but finding a connecting point. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? FMEA or other topics?
I have a last one.
Okay, Sean, go ahead.
Yeah, so in regards to cybersecurity, right? Most healthcare facilities, in this case hospitals, have their own type of protection for their network. And so network-based software that has to be installed already has a type of security from the outside attacks. Is there in any way a possibility to make an argument that such security is enough to secure your software that you have installed on the network?
It may be possible, but then you may be limiting yourself to only one environment or one kind of environment, right? Not every environment would be the same. And the second thing to think about would be you may conform to those specs, but your device may introduce some vulnerabilities which are outside what they are trying to control. So the interface. So it goes both ways. Your device could be an entry point for an attack to them, and fine, they give you some specs that you have to fulfill. But if you have other, let's say, software components or other modes of operation which may not conform to them completely and may be out for now, there could be a vulnerability. So you have to think about in terms of this as broadly and what you can control versus what you cannot control. And that will result into your estimation of likelihood of exploitation of a vulnerability, which connects to, and again, we are going a little bit technical in there, but it's a sequence of steps. First, a vulnerability has to be exploited through a threat event. That has to go to a hazardous situation. That has to go to harm. So there are different likelihood, and each step could have its own level of uncertainty.
I see.
But unless you can be fully confident that you are not introducing any new vulnerabilities and it's broadly applicable, your device will have limitations in its intended use then, right? So that's one thing to think about. I would not rely on a specific use environment to limit the application of a device.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Now, I know, guys, we are almost to the end of our conversation here. So this is not meant to be one and done thing. Many of you are new. You will probably receive a request for a feedback survey after this event. I would love to hear from you. I would love to see you again and want to make it as beneficial to you, valuable to you as possible. You're always welcome to submit questions in advance, right? And many of you do. And we try to make sure that we cover them. But a lot of our conversation is more free-flowing, and that may not be something that you are used to in seeing in different webinars. So this is not a webinar. I tell that people right away. It's more to engage and have a conversation. I invite you to join our knowledge sharing forum, which I've set up. It's free to join. We can continue our conversation there through discussions and sharing our expertise. You will get a link to join that forum as well. So I appreciate all of you joining. Happy Thanksgiving to you, to those in the United States, and otherwise elsewhere, please enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.